Hey everyone, and welcome back to the deep dive. You know how much we love to, well, dive deep into complex topics, and today is no exception.
Absolutely.
We're going to be tackling ethics.
Oh, ethics.
Yeah, and our source material is, get this, 3 whole chapters from a Dutch philosophy textbook.
Sounds dense.
It is, but stick with us because this is going to be juicy.
I promise it's a lot more interesting than it sounds.
We're going to be exploring those big ethical frameworks like, consequentialism, utilitarianism, all those isms.
Right, the different lenses we use to decide what's right and wrong.
Exactly. And trust me, there are some real head scratchers in here. We're even going to see how these ideas play out in like a real life case of, get this, a golfer who sued a sports federation.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so buckle up because by the end of this deep dive, you're going to have a whole new perspective on what it really means to be ethical. You ready?
Let's do it.
All right, let's jump right in. The book kicks off with this wild story, right? About Anna Sorokin. She's the fake heiress.
Oh, yeah, I remember her.
Yeah. She basically scammed her way into, like, the New York elite, the whole scene.
Crazy story.
And she even conned her friend, Rachel Williams, out of a ton of money.
Oof.
And it really makes you think, like, was Rachel, like, naive?
Hmm.
Or was Anna, like, fully responsible for her actions? Where do we even draw the line?
That's a perfect example to illustrate consequentialism, right? The whole premise is that we judge whether an action is right or wrong based solely on the consequences.
So it's all about the outcome.
Exactly. And utilitarianism takes it a step further. Think greatest good for the greatest number. It's all about maximizing happiness.
Okay, so like spreading the joy around.
Right. Not just for yourself, but for everyone involved. Imagine you find a wallet on the street, cash, credit cards, the whole shebang, but no ID.
Okay, I'm listening. I think I know where this is going.
Do you keep it, knowing the chances of getting caught are slim? Or do you try to return it?
Okay, that's a tough one. I mean, come on, who hasn't thought about keeping a found wallet?
Right, it's a classic dilemma.
Yeah.
But utilitarianism would probably say, return it, the owner gets their stuff back, you avoid that guilty feeling.
Everyone wins.
Right, happier overall.
But okay, let's be real. Wouldn't most people at least like be tempted to keep the cash?
Probably.
It seems almost too idealistic to expect people to always choose like the greater good over like their own wants.
You've hit a key point there. Utilitarianism can get a bit tricky when we factor in human nature. We're not always angels.
Yeah, we're definitely not perfect.
Jeremy Bentham, one of the big names in utilitarianism, he talked about the tendency of an action to produce happiness.
Mm.
But it's not always black and white, is it?
Yeah, like I could have good intentions, but things could still go wrong.
Exactly. We need to consider both the intended and the actual consequences. A well-intentioned action that backfires can still have a negative ethical impact.
Okay. So even a well-meaning action with like a disastrous outcome could still be considered unethical.
That's the tricky part. The book actually gives this really powerful example of George Elser. You familiar with him?
I not know.
He's this guy who tried to assassinate Hitler.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. He wanted to stop the war, save lives, obviously. Very noble goals.
Right. Sounds like a good guy.
But his plan failed, and people died in the attempt. So good motives, tragic outcome.
That's heavy.
Elser's case really highlights the complexities of judging morality based solely on the outcome. It also illustrates the difference between two types of utilitarianism: act utilitarianism and rule utilitarianism. Act utilitarianism is like a snapshot. You judge the morality of one specific act based on its immediate consequences.
So in that split second, when I'm holding the lost wallet, my happiness is all that matters. Like finders keepers, losers weepers.
Well, not quite. That's where rule utilitarianism comes in. It takes a longer view. It's about following those rules that generally lead to the greatest good, even if a single action might suggest otherwise.
So it's about the big picture, not just the immediate situation.
Exactly. Like that case in Belgium, remember? The one with the illegal rave. The police actually chose not to shut it down.
Really? Why not?
Because there were just too many people. Breaking up the party could have caused chaos, injuries, even more problems.
So sometimes breaking the rules is actually the best way to, like, maximize happiness. Isn't that a bit risky, though?
It definitely raises some questions about how we balance individual freedom with what's best for society. From a rule utilitarian perspective, breaking the law, even for a good time, can erode those social norms that benefit everyone.
It makes you think, right? Like, where do we draw the line between personal freedom and the greater good? This is complicated.
And that's the beauty of ethics. It's all about navigating those gray areas, asking the right questions, and challenging our
Well, we have
assumptions.
easy answers, huh?
Exactly. But having these frameworks, these ways of thinking about right and wrong, gives us the tools we need to approach those tricky situations.
Makes sense. Okay, but what if I'm just feeling, like, plain selfish? Could that actually be a good thing?
Now, that is an interesting question. It leads us to our next ethical framework, ethical egoism. The idea here is that acting in your own self-interest is, believe it or not, the morally right thing to do.
Wait, really? So being selfish isn't always bad? That's a bold statement.
It's a controversial one, that's for sure. But think about it this way. Back in the 1700s, this philosopher named Bernard Mandeville, he argued that those so-called private vices, like wanting to get ahead, could actually lead to public benefits.
Okay, I'm not sure I follow. How does that work? It seems kind of counterintuitive.
Think of it like this. Someone takes their medication because they want to feel better, right?
Yeah, it makes sense.
Totally self-serving.
Hmm.
But by getting healthy, they can go back to work, contribute to society, even inspire others to take care of themselves.
Okay. So even those things that look like selfless acts could actually be rooted in self-interest.
Absolutely. Think about like donating to offset your carbon footprint after flying. On the surface, it seems like an environmental act.
Right, saving the planet, all that.
But it also eases your guilt about flying.
Ooh, good point. Or like
Yeah.
visiting that relative who always slips you some cash.
Exactly.
Mm,
Are we all secret egoists deep down? Who knows?
that's such a good question.
It challenges us to really examine our motivations, doesn't it?
It does. Okay, so we've got this idea that maybe we're all kind of selfish. But one of the big names in ethical egoism, Thomas Hobbes, he took it even further. He believed that humans are just inherently self-interested and that we only cooperate because we're afraid of punishment. Wow. So we're all just looking out for number one. That's kind of a bleak view of humanity.
It's a pretty stark perspective for sure.
Hmm.
Makes you think, though, doesn't it, about what really motivates us.
It does. Okay, let's switch gears for a second. Imagine this. My friend is hiding from someone who wants to hurt them. This person comes to me demanding to know where they are. What do I do?
Oh, that's a tough one.
Right. Do I lie to protect my friend? Even though, lying is generally considered wrong.
That's a classic ethical dilemma that takes us into the realm of deontology, a framework often associated with Immanuel Kant.
Okay, so how does deontology handle this?
Unlike consequentialism, which focuses on the outcome, deontology is all about following universal moral principles, no matter the consequences.
So in this case, lying to save my friend could still be considered wrong, even if it's the only way to protect them. That seems like really harsh.
That's the challenge. Kant's famous categorical imperative says that for an action to be moral, it has to be universalizable without contradiction.
Okay, can you explain that in English?
Basically, it means that everyone should be able to follow this rule all the time, and it shouldn't create any logical problems. Imagine if everyone lied all the time.
Oh, chaos.
Right. Trust would disappear. Lying wouldn't even work because nobody would believe anything. So even though you desperately want to lie to protect your friend, it goes against this universal rule of honesty.
Okay, but what if I argue that the good saving my friend's life outweighs the bad of telling one little lie?
That's where deontology gets really interesting. Kant believed that moral duties are absolute. They cannot be bent or broken, even in those extreme cases. He gave us two main formulations of this categorical imperative. The first one is that we should act only according to those rules that we could imagine everyone following.
So it's got to be a rule that works for everyone, not just a one-time exception.
Right. And the second one is about treating people as ends in themselves, never as a means to an end.
Okay, I'm not sure I get that one. What does that mean in practice?
Think about a doping athlete. They take performance-enhancing drugs to win a competition, which benefits them personally.
Right, they get the gold medal.
But they're violating the idea of fair play. They're treating their competitors like obstacles instead of respecting them as individuals.
Gotcha. It's about respecting everyone's autonomy, their right to be treated fairly. Okay, that makes sense. But isn't this whole deontology thing a bit rigid? What about those situations where lying really is the best option?
That's a common criticism. One of Kant's contemporaries, Benjamin Constant, argued that lying to protect your friend from a murderer is the right thing to do.
I mean, it kind of makes sense, right?
Right. But Kant insisted on sticking to those moral duties, even in extreme situations. He believed that it's essential for maintaining a consistent ethical framework. It's about following the rules, even when it's hard.
So it's about those principles, huh?
Exactly. We've talked about actions and rules, but what about the person making those choices?
Right. Like what makes someone a good person? Is it just about following the rules or getting the best results?
You've just hit on the core of virtue ethics. It's about developing those good inner qualities, those character traits that make us ethical. Honesty, compassion, courage, all those things.
So it's about who you are, not just what you do.
Right. The book uses this great example of Nelson Mandela. His grandson wrote a book called The Courage to Forgive that describes Mandela's incredible ability to forgive even after all those years of imprisonment and injustice.
Yeah, he was a remarkable man.
And that forgiveness, it wasn't just a one-time decision. It was a reflection of his character.
Wow. So it's about cultivating the right kind of character, not just checking off a list of rules.
Exactly. And one of the key figures in virtue ethics, Aristotle, he believed that virtue is this golden mean.
Golden mean. Sounds fancy.
It's a balance between two extremes.
Oh, okay. So it's about finding that sweet spot. Give me an example.
Think about courage. It's the balance between recklessness and cowardice. Too much, and you're jumping into dangerous situations without thinking. Too little, and you're frozen by fear. True courage is finding that middle ground.
Okay, I get it. It's all about balance.
Right, and the book also mentions this guy, Philippe Lacroix. He was a former gangster, got sentenced to death, but then completely turned his life around and became a teacher.
That's incredible. A total transformation.
It's a powerful story. Aristotle believed that we all naturally strive for this thing called eudaimonia.
Eudaimonia. Okay, now you're showing off.
It basically means living a fulfilling life. And Lacroix, he found that fulfillment. He found a purpose,
It's really inspiring. It shows that people can change.
It does. Both Aristotle and another philosopher, David Hume, they both distinguished between two types of virtues, natural and artificial.
What's the difference? Are some virtues, better than others?
It's not about being better, but about where they come from. Natural virtues, like kindness, compassion, those are seen as inherent human qualities. Artificial virtues, like justice, keeping promises, those are more like social constructs.
Okay, so some we're born with and some we learn from society.
You got it. Hume, he believed that virtue comes from our natural sentiments.
Like our gut feelings.
In a way, yes. And then society reinforces those feelings through rewards and punishments. Like we're encouraged to be virtuous.
So our upbringing, the communities we're part of, those shape our morals. Makes sense.
Exactly. The book also mentions a more modern virtue ethicist, Philippa Foot. She believed that virtues are essential for us to truly flourish.
So being a virtuous person actually helps us live a better life.
That was her argument. She saw a strong connection between virtue and overall happiness. And her work brings up some interesting questions, like, how do you think she'd feel about The Great Donor Show?
Oh,
It was this controversial Dutch TV show. A terminally ill woman chose who'd get her kidney.
whoa. That's intense.
Right. Would she support it, because it raises awareness about organ donation? Or would she think it's exploitative?
That's a tough call. It makes you really think about what we value. Speaking of valuing things, we've talked about actions, rules, and character. But what about care? What does that have to do with ethics?
You've just touched on another important framework, the ethics of care.
Okay, I'm intrigued.
It asks whether caring itself
Yeah.
could be its own ethical system. Think about it. We all have experience with giving and receiving care, right?
Of course.
So could that be the foundation for making ethical decisions?
I never thought of it like that. It does make sense, though. Caring is a big part of being human.
Exactly. And the ethics of care emphasizes relationships, empathy, and responding to others' needs. It's different from the more abstract frameworks we talked about earlier.
So it's more about the personal and emotional aspects of morality. Seems kind of warm and fuzzy.
It definitely brings those elements into the picture. It's about recognizing the importance of connection and understanding, especially when it comes to the people we care about.
Okay, that's great for our personal lives. But does it apply to society as a whole? Can we base a whole system of ethics on something as personal as care?
That's where it gets really interesting. Now, one of the big names in this area is Carol Gilligan. She critiqued those stages of moral development that Lawrence Kohlberg came up with.
Oh, yeah, I vaguely remember those. What does that have to do with caring, though?
Gilligan argued that Kohlberg's model, which emphasizes abstract justice, those universal principles,
Right.
well, she felt it didn't fully capture how many people, especially women, actually make moral decisions. She thought it overlooked the care perspective.
So men and women might think about morality differently.
That's a big part of it. And she wasn't saying one is better than the other, just that we need to pay attention to that care perspective, especially when it comes to those close relationships.
Makes you wonder if all those traditional ethical theories are missing something, right?
They definitely have their limitations.
Okay, so we've got these big frameworks for understanding ethics. We've got consequentialism, ethical egoism, deontology, virtue ethics, and now the ethics of care. My brain is like full.
It's a lot to take in, and we're just getting started.
Wait, there's more.
Oh, yeah, we've got a whole lot more to unpack.
Oh, boy. Okay, well, I guess we'll take a break and come back for more in just a bit.
Sounds good.
Okay, so before the break, we were talking about the ethics of care, right? All about relationships and empathy and stuff. But something's been bugging me.
What's that?
What about those situations where, being impartial is super important? Like, can we really prioritize caring for the people we know without, like, showing favoritism?
That's a really good point. It's a common critique of care ethics, actually.
Yeah.
Some folks argue that focusing just on personal relationships can lead to, well, biased decisions.
I can see that.
And it could undermine fairness, especially when we're talking about bigger societal issues.
Yeah, it's like, how do we balance those individual needs with the need for, justice and equality for everyone?
It's a constant balancing act, for sure.
It is.
But proponents of care ethics, they argue that it's not about ditching impartiality entirely. It's more about expanding our understanding of what care really means.
Okay, I'm listening.
It's about realizing how interconnected our lives are and figuring out ways to extend that care beyond our immediate circle, to include the well-being of the whole community.
So thinking bigger.
Exactly.
That sounds lovely, but how do we actually do that?
It starts with recognizing that care isn't just an individual responsibility, it's a collective one. We need systems, structures that actually support caregiving. Think affordable childcare, paid family leave, accessible healthcare.
Right, stuff that makes it easier to take care of each other.
Exactly. Those policies demonstrate a commitment to caring for all members of society, not just those we're close to.
Okay, so it's about building a culture of care that goes beyond just our personal relationships.
Right. And it also means confronting those deep-seated biases that will devalue care work.
Oh, yeah, like those assumptions that caregiving is women's work.
Exactly. We need to recognize the contributions of all caregivers, regardless of gender.
So care ethics isn't just about our individual actions, but about, transforming societal norms. It's a pretty big goal.
It is a big task. But even small acts of care can make a difference.
Oh, I like that.
It's about cultivating those habits of empathy and compassion in our daily lives.
Even with strangers.
Even with strangers. Those everyday choices can reflect our values.
So ethics isn't just about those big dilemmas, those life or death situations.
Right. It's about those small, consistent choices that shape who we are and how we interact with the world around us.
Okay, so far we've explored utilitarianism, ethical egoism, deontology, virtue ethics, and now the ethics of care. It's been quite a journey.
It has. And it shows how diverse ethical thinking can be.
It does. But it's important to remember that these frameworks, they're not mutually exclusive, are they?
Not at all. We can actually use them in combination, depending on the situation.
So it's like having a toolbox.
Exactly. Different tools for different jobs. The key is developing that ability to analyze those complex dilemmas from multiple angles.
Having those different perspectives is so important.
It is. It's not about finding the one right answer. It's about being aware of the complexities of ethical decision-making.
So we need to be flexible, adapt our thinking.
Exactly. Ethics is an ongoing process. It's not something we figure out once and for all.
It's a lifelong journey.
Exactly. It's about reflecting, thinking critically, and being open to adjusting our understanding as we learn and grow.
Okay, so it's about constantly evolving, ethically speaking.
Right. The world's changing all the time.
Yeah.
And our ethical frameworks need to keep up. What might have been considered ethical in the past might not be acceptable today.
Makes you realize that we can't just, set our morals on autopilot and call it a day.
Exactly.
We have to keep learning, keep asking questions.
And that's what makes it so interesting.
Yeah.
Ethics is a dynamic process. It's about engagement, reflection, and action.
Okay, let's do a super quick recap of everything we've covered so far. We started with consequentialism, which is all about those outcomes, right?
Right.
And its most famous version, utilitarianism, which is about maximizing happiness for as many people as possible.
The greatest good for the greatest number.
Then we got into ethical egoism, which says that acting in your own self-interest is actually the most ethical thing you can do.
A bit controversial, but definitely thought-provoking.
It is. Next up was deontology, with its focus on universal moral principles no matter what. We talked about Kant's categorical imperative, that idea that any ethical rule has to work for everyone.
It's about those duties and obligations that guide our actions.
Then we explored virtue ethics, which shifts the focus from actions to character. Remember Aristotle and that golden mean?
Finding that balance between extremes.
And his idea of eudaimonia, living that fulfilling, virtuous life.
Striving for excellence.
And finally, we unpacked the ethics of care, emphasizing relationships, empathy, and taking care of each other's needs.
It's about recognizing the importance of connection and understanding.
Wow, we've covered a lot.
We have. But there's still more to explore.
Oh no, my brain is already overloaded.
Don't worry, we'll break it down even further when we come back. We still have some fascinating terrain to cover in our exploration of ethical decision-making.
Okay, well, I guess I'll get another cup of coffee and brace myself. Back in a few.
And we're back. Man, ethics is like a serious workout for the brain. It is. But it's a good workout. You're the kind that makes you stronger.
Totally. But here's the thing. We've talked about all these theories, frameworks, all these big ideas.
Right.
But how do we actually, put this stuff into action? How to go from thinking about ethics to actually living ethically?
That's the million-dollar question. And, it is tricky. It's one thing to understand these ethical frameworks, in theory.
Right.
But it's another to actually apply them in real-life situations. Remember that lost wallet example?
Oh, yeah.
It's easy to say you'd return it when you're just, sitting here chatting.
In the comfort of the studio.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But what about when you're standing there, wallet in hand, on the street?
Yeah, the real world is way messier.
It is. There are all these factors, right? Time, convenience, even maybe a little bit of fear. All that stuff can cloud our judgment.
It can. So how do we, stay true to those ethical principles when things get tough?
It's about practice. You
Yeah.
have to, build up those ethical muscles.
Ethical.
Kind of. Building that ethical awareness so it becomes a habit. Like second nature.
So we make it a part of how we make decisions, not just in those big dramatic moments, but in our everyday choices too.
Exactly. It's about those everyday choices. Think about the products you buy.
Okay.
Do you think about, where they come from?
Hmm.
Were they produced sustainably? Were the people who made them treated fairly?
You're right. I don't always think about that stuff.
It's easy to forget, but those are all ethical questions, and we can ask them every day.
So it's about bringing ethics into every part of our lives, not just treating it like this, separate thing we think about every now and then.
Right, and it's not enough to just, feel like you're doing the right thing. You should be able to explain your reasoning.
Oh, so be able to justify my choices.
Yeah. Why are you doing what you're doing? What principles are behind it? It helps you understand your own ethical compass better.
Okay, that makes sense. But how do we get better at, explaining our ethical reasoning? That seems hard.
It starts with asking yourself, why?
Why?
Yeah. Why do I think this is the right thing to do? What are the principles behind this? It helps you unpack your own beliefs.
So, getting curious about my own thinking.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And don't be afraid to challenge yourself. What you think is ethical now, maybe later you'll learn something new and change your mind.
Be open to new ideas.
Right. Growth often involves, questioning yourself and being open to different perspectives.
It's a journey. Now, I know the book wraps up with this quote from Plichtsethiek, that Dutch sociologist.
I love that quote.
He says, "Under all circumstances, practicing small virtues remains possible and meaningful." What do you think he means by that?
It's like, even when the world feels overwhelming, with all these ethical dilemmas,
Yeah.
we can still make a difference. It's those small acts of kindness, integrity, all of that.
So it's not about being a superhero, but about those small everyday things.
Right. Those little acts of courage, honesty, kindness,
Yeah.
they matter.
I love that. Makes you feel hopeful. This whole deep dive has been amazing. I feel like I actually get these different ethical perspectives now.
I'm glad to hear that. And remember, it's a journey. We're all constantly learning and growing.
So true. Well, thanks so much for joining us on this ethical adventure. We hope it's given you a lot to think about.
And we hope it inspires you to keep exploring these questions, keep learning, keep challenging yourself, and most importantly, keep striving to make the world a little bit better.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Until next time, keep diving deep.